Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining me this morning.
You're very welcome.
Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your involvement with the creative arts?
Indeed, I can. My name is Mark Spybey, and I'm a musician of sorts. Although throughout the whole of my 30-odd years career, I've prided myself on calling myself a non-musician. So I make music, and I record music, and I play live. And I am from Redcar, and I moved back here, grew up here, and moved back here 2 years ago. But I've lived in Canada and all over the place. So
great, we're really interesting. So, so what took you on that journey around the world and back to Redcar again?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and it's an interesting story. Well, it is to me anyway. But I grew up in the 70s, and as a kid, it wasn't as easy to find the kind of music or art that I was interested in. And there was a number of outlets. It was like the radio or the TV, really. I was always interested in experimental music or different, avant-garde kind of music from a very, very early age. And I was lucky enough to see a band who I was really into called Can, who were from Germany, because they actually played in Redcar, because we used to have a fantastic venue, the Cotton Ball. So all sorts of bands there.
Anyway, I didn't know that.
Yeah, incredible around the time of punk, because most of the major bands either came here or to the Rock Garden in Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like, 5 minutes away. So I went to see this band who I loved, who were from Germany, called Can. And it sort of set me off on a kind of journey, really. So I started to make my own music. It was in, post-punk bands, I guess you would call them. Out of Middlesbrough, and then eventually Newcastle, where I was living. And to cut a long story short, many, many years later, I found myself in a position where when I was living in Canada, I obtained a manager. And he happened to work for a record company that was Can's record company. And Can are a very well-known band. By this time, they'd long since broken up. But they were doing some solo project tours, some shows, big shows around Europe. And to cut a long story short, I was actually invited to be a member of the guitarist from Can's band, and I played with him for several years, and before he died. And so here's this kid, seeking out obscure, difficult music in the 70s, which was really, really difficult in Redcar, and then ended up working with one of the bands who he actually saw at the Cotton Ball, who became hugely, influential. So it's a very strange, cyclical kind of story. But I think that kind of sums up my career, really, which has been a happy series of benign accidents.
Yes, exactly. Have you heard of the term pronoia?
Yes.
Like instead of everyone, because it's like the whole universe is conspiring to like if you head off towards your dreams, all kinds of things seem to happen that need to fall into place in order for you to fulfill them. And it seems like if you steadfastly head for your dreams, then the universe likes to chuck these things in for us.
Absolutely. I mean, here's another one. So I was a member of the Hunt Saboteurs. Back in my radical days, which I'm still there, really. And I ended up meeting another organizer from Newcastle who said, I'm in a band. And he said, he's a record. And I'd actually heard of this band called Zoviet-France, because I got this very obscure record catalogue, and it had their band's products in it. And I joined the band, and they were actually fairly well known within sort of certain genre of music. And then I moved to Canada, and then I met somebody else who had recently, who was a Canadian rock star, basically, a really nice guy who I befriended, and who had to actually put on a concert by this band called Zoviet-France after I left. And so I started to work with him. And he was, at the time, he was having a record produced by a drummer called Martin Atkins, an English guy who was living in America, who was, again, very famous because he happened to be in this band called Public Image Limited with Johnny Lydon. And he signed me to his record company. So there's this accidental meeting with some hunt saboteurs that leads me to Zoviet-France, that leads me to working with these guys from a band called Skinny Puppy, that leads me to being signed to a record company by Martin Atkins from Public Image. And it all happened because of, connections. I often talk about the fact that, being an artist is part of being a community. And, you naturally seek out like-minded people, and that community is actually very small, and it's connected, and it's multinational. So here I am back living in Redcar in my hometown, when all of my work really is in North America. So, but
you're not actually not alone in that. There's some quite a lot of people have either chosen to stay in Teesside or have come back to Teesside when they're doing really well in their careers, and they're more than happy to be here. So I'm interested in, so what kind of music do you make? When you say it's not really music, is it possible to describe, or do we just need to have a listen?
Well, it is possible to describe. I'm notoriously fickle about classifying the kind of music that I make, because I think it kind of signposts you, and none of it is really accurate. But I think the bands who I started to work with were all described as post-industrial, whatever that means. There was a kind of wave of music after punk that started to kind of use grittier elements, and also started to assimilate kind of world music into it as well. So, but when I say I'm not a musician, I'm a drummer, which basically means I'm not a musician. But I started to embrace the idea of using easy to access and simple sound sources to make music with, and then process them electronically. So although I know what I'm doing, I've never taken an interest in knowing how it works. So I guess you would describe the genre that I work in as either ambient, or some people call it dark ambient. But I also do more kind of, song structures, and I sing, and but it's definitely in that genre of, if you're at a kind of party with friends, and you play the kind of music, it's either going to kind of send people to sleep or clear them out of the room. I think that some people describe it as being akin dynamically to kind of contemporary classical music. And I've always been interested in improvisation. So at the heart of everything I do is improvisation, and every collaboration that I enter into, it's the idea of making music together, and that should be a joyful process. I think it should be a stimulating, inspiring, joyful process. And it's all about listening.
So I recently curated my first art exhibition. It's online. It's like digital multimedia art exhibition, and in that I got 3 of our brilliant local photographers went out and took photographs of underpasses for me. Wow. It came from an idea my friend Beck Lambert had, Astrolithic Megapunk, about underpasses being liminal spaces. So she's done that. She did a thesis on it. She's done a soundscape and a narration, and we took images from local underpasses and put them to the narration. Yeah. So that was a great project. So I'm kind of thinking, bringing your sound element to it, like creating those kinds of sound dioramas for specific places. Yes. We're really running with this kind of brutalist theme and this underpass theme at the moment, and I think the kind of music that you make would definitely add. Like, we could go, it'd be great to go out there, because I think outside is the place, isn't it, this year? And
I have done an environmental specific work, and I have played in some interesting places that are very, very unique environments. Like, for example, underneath the arches of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, which is this huge vaulted cavern space. It's got a natural reverbs time of 20 seconds. And so, you know, and we have worked in creating specific pieces of music for specific spaces. But I'm intrigued by the underpass idea. I mean, I think, you know, a friend of mine said he's a musician, but a writer mainly, a music writer in Vancouver. He once said something to me about my music. It was not long before I decided to move back to Europe. And he said, you know, and his family were originally from the northeast of England. And he said, I think what you're doing is you're trying to find the sound of your home. And I think, it sounds very, very, you know, interested in that. And I think he was right. And to me, there was this journey that's not the same, but it's still kind of resonant. As a kid, the journey from Redcar to Middlesbrough on the train was just fascinating because it went through the Warrenby marshes, and you would see foxes early in the morning and herons. And then you're engulfed by this kind of like Dante's Inferno, you know, for 4 or 5 miles before it hit Middlesbrough. Right through the middle of British Steel and through the, you know, old stations like Grangetown, and then via the coke ovens, which are very sadly going to be pulled down. And, you know, this belching steam and sulfurous kind of smell. And it was really inspiring, you know, and I think he was right. I think I was attempting to kind of create something that was, you know, reminiscent and resonant of the environment that I grew up in, that I still feel, you know, an incredible attachment to. I'm deeply upset about them pulling down the blast furnace at Redcar.
Well, again, that's something perhaps there's still a little bit of hope, not to keep the whole thing, but to keep part of it. So, I must put you in touch with Jeff Taylor. He's the interview. Do you know Jeff? So
I don't know, but I am a member of Facebook group, and I do sign petitions and things. And I take photographs of it. I had a photograph of it. It's quite abstract, but a photograph of it recently in an exhibition in County Durham that was, you know, huge posters at bus stops. I think the exhibition was actually called Bus Stops. And it was of the blast furnace and the background of the Eston Hills and the Newmass Woods. And so, I mean, this environment that we live in, you know, is incredibly rich and incredibly, for me, still very inspiring, you know. And it's not just a nostalgic thing, because obviously we're surrounded by beautiful countryside too, and the sea is another, you know, constant focus in my work. Really, I really can't get away with it. I always return to it because as a kid, you know, I grew up on the beach. Basically, every summer I spent every day on the beach. So it's still, you know, it's still very important to me, this whole area. Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, well, that you know, really interesting. And you know, I'm just trying to get as many stories told and art made about what there is right now in a hope of being able to keep it. I was told many years ago, if you want to save anything, you have to start actively campaigning to save it 5 years before it's announced that it's under threat. Otherwise, the decisions are already probably made. But anyway, let's not get too sucked into politics. So, so tell us a little bit about lockdown, and has that affected what you get up to, and what you're planning? Are you planning a way out of it, or are you just going to see how things go this year?
Wow, it's really interesting. I mean, it's probably quite ironic, but lockdown has really stimulated me creatively. And I've talked to a lot of friends around the world, and it's either done that, it's either stimulated people, or it's driven them into inertia. But for me, I mean, the first lockdown coincided with me finally retiring from my day job, and it was uncannily around the same time. But I found it incredibly, I mean, it was anxiety provoking, stressful, but I found the whole process of having to kind of like be contained, especially in this studio that I've got, incredibly inspiring. And so I've been since very, very productive. I mean, I've spent a part of every day in this very room, and I've, you know, created a lot of music over the past year, and I've really You know, I think because we've not been able to play live, which to be honest, I don't do a lot of. I mean, I tend to do it in bursts, you know, and it involves quite a lot of travel. But because we're not able to do that, I've been playing live to the internet a lot, and I've been invited to do that a lot. Plus, I think people have really embraced artists because they recognize that, you know, the money-making potential is minimized through the whole lockdown process. So internationally, people are being really supportive. So I find myself, you know, being asked to do all sorts of online events and collaborations and remixes and, you know, all sorts of things. So actually the work has really, it's really sped up. And as for a way out of it, well, I don't know, because I mean, I've just enjoyed myself so much, and I found it quite inspiring. Then you know, I can't see myself immediately running around and hugging people. You know, I think it's going to take a while to start to feel more comfortable being around people. I went for my vaccination a couple of weeks ago, and the thought of getting the vaccination wasn't, you know, stressful, but the idea of being in a space with people and not knowing if I could control that in terms of social distancing was highly stressful, I have to say. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's been the hardest thing about this pandemic, is because for most things, okay, whatever opinion you want to have and whatever way you want to behave, fair enough, that's your decision. But often these are decisions that we're making that affect everybody, and that's what makes it difficult for people that you know, don't have any choice, or you know, people who are kind of a little bit dismissed because they've got a pre-existing condition or something, you know. I think that's what's made it difficult. But you know, let's. I mean, I'm the same. I haven't been out. I've been out twice in the last year, but I'm definitely pinning my hopes on outside. I think we're pretty safe out there. Statistics seem to be like 3% or less of infections, and that's when people are close up. So that's what I'm trying to do. Plan for outdoors this year.
I also took up long distance cycling. I've always done it, but you know, I've been doing that consistently over the past year, which is just brilliant because, you know, well, I've got fitter, but I'm able to go out and see some of the things. And actually, some of that has been very, very much about checking out some of the, you know, industrial heritage of the region. My family from East Cleveland, and so I've, you know, really checked out all of the old ironstone mines, and you know, have got plans now to go and visit them more and things. So it's been really, yeah, I have got out and about. I just haven't seen a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been lovely talking to you, Mark, and I think we've got a lot more to catch up with here, but we'll leave it for now on the interview, and let's chat and see what we can work out to contribute towards saving our industrial heritage. That would be great.
You bet. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for this opportunity. Really do admire what you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much.